Good morning. Welcome to Inspire Your Managers and Get Results, How to Use Leadership Development to Supercharge Lean with Carlos Venegas. I am Christy Snow with Results Washington. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be your moderator today. We do have about 834 attendees who have registered for this session, and we are so happy to have you here. I am joined by Emily Dahl, who will be providing ASL interpretation today. Thanks to my team member, Kathy Holder, who is managing technology behind the scenes. I want to share a few things before we get started. We know many of you are familiar with Zoom meetings, but there are some differences in Zoom webinar, which is what we're using today. The biggest difference is that you won't be able to talk and you won't be able to have your video visible. This ensures that all participants can focus on today's presentation. We want to draw your attention to a few different features in Zoom and how we'll use them. If you move your mouse, the toolbar will appear and you can see icons for the chat and Q&A. Please be aware these are two different features. Chat will be available for some parts of this session during certain exercises. And please keep in mind, this is a public record and will only be monitored during those times. Also, chat between participants is not available during the session. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to pop those into the Q&A box. We won't be able to answer all the questions, but we will try our best to provide some answers. And if you're experiencing any technical issues, please use the Q&A feature and we'll do our best to help you. Next, you'll notice an icon for closed captioning. If you wish to see the closed captioning, click that icon and select Show Subtitle, or you can view the full transcript. You can also adjust your view to make the presentation or speaker larger by sliding the vertical bar on your screen from left to right. Session materials are available on our website and videos will be posted within a week. If we get disconnected or run into technical problems, we will try to get the webinar back up and running for about 5 minutes. And if we're not able to do so, we will record the session at another time and post that to our website. And finally, at the end of the session, a survey will pop up. Please take the time to complete this survey. This will provide the presenter and us at Results Washington real-time feedback. So we are very fortunate to have Carlos and Marilyn Venegas with us today. Carlos Venegas has helped organizations improve and simplify their work for over 25 years. He's a published author who wrote the book Flow in the Office, Implementing and Sustaining Lean Improvements, as well as articles for Productivity Press and Quality Digest. His client list includes the EPA, the state of Texas, Washington State, the city of Seattle, and King County. Carlos has a master's in applied behavioral science. Marilyn Venegas is an executive coach and change management consultant. She has taught teamwork, project management, interpersonal communication, and leadership in North America, Europe, and Asia. Her particular focus is emotional intelligence and how people can expand their emotional awareness and behavioral choices in the workplace, particularly when facing difficult interactions with others. With that, I'll pass off to Carlos and Marilyn.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my presentation with you. One moment, please, while I get this set up. Okay, and just want to confirm that you can see the slide deck. Christy, can you confirm that you can see the slide deck? Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, how to use Lean to develop Lean leaders. That's what we're going to talk to you about today. And in telling you about this, I'm going to share with you a three-part story about how I created an online training that uses Lean to develop leaders. Now, in doing so, I braided together online delivery, Lean, and leadership development. And that was actually kind of a challenge. And I'm going to share with you how generous clients and colleagues helped me tackle that challenge. I'll describe the steps along the way, my thinking and my results, and what I learned, which includes what did not work. I'll share what my clients have told me are the critical success factors. And finally, I'm going to go over the power of culture, groups, and individual managers in creating a rich environment for change. So the first part of the story is about adapting an in-person training for online delivery. So for years, I've been flying back and forth across North America, conducting lean events, as well as developing and delivering training. Then in March of 2020, a lot changed for all of us. With COVID strangling travel, it became really clear that in-person trainings weren't going to be possible anymore. And so one of my clients called me and asked me about an in-person training that I developed for them. And she asked, would it make sense to convert that in-person training to an online format? And my first response, to be perfectly honest, was no. I'd attended online trainings in the past, and I found them frustrating. In one online training I attended, I spent 2 days listening to a well-meaning trainer reader PowerPoint slides to us, and it was absolutely awful. In another online training, what I learned was interesting, but they didn't show me how to do it. So, and then there are the technical issues, like we referenced in the start of this presentation here, the platform not working or internet bandwidth issues. So it just seemed too hard for participants to stay motivated with this online training. So, how could we reproduce that rich in-person training experience? So later that day, after a conversation with my client, a voice in my head said, hey, wait a minute, why not convert that training into an online format? I kind of started out with limited thinking. Maybe we could overcome those issues that I found so frustrating. Maybe we could provide a rich learning experience. So the content and exercises would have to be modified to go from in-person to online, and they'd have to still be engaging. We'd need to build an online training platform, but I figured it could work. So we decided to move forward. I developed the training, incorporating the latest thinking about adult learning, and it did well. People liked it. So we trained over 190 people online, and 94% would recommend the training to others. And 81% of the participants reported their improvement work with teams was successful. Now, I consider this an excellent result because for many, this was their very first exposure to lean. So far, so good as far as online training goes, but I thought there was room for more improvement. So this is where the second part of the story begins. After adapting that in-person training for online, I saw the potential for a lean training program built specifically for online delivery. So this meant that my training would not be a repurposed in-person training. It would be designed and built, as an online training from the ground up. So my goal for the training was that it had to be better than in-person. I was excited about how this could be more effective at equipping managers with the tools to improve work processes, and they'd be able to go back to the training materials anytime. And it took a lot of hard work to get there, and it wasn't easy. So here are the online training design features. Of course, the training had to be online. That's a given, but it had to yield measurable business results. And those results needed to be immediately evident by the end of the training, not after. That meant training on a real process. The training would need to use simple, clear methods and tools, and also no jargon. I just wanted to use simple, plain English. The training would need to help build leadership skills. I wanted to strengthen the working relationship between the manager and the work team. And because that sets the foundation for inspiring engagement and inclusion and trust. They needed to be able to lead process improvement teams with confidence. If they don't feel confident, their teams are going to know it. The training would have to encourage resourcefulness and adaptability. Another important design element was to minimize trainer dependency. I wanted to avoid using the trainer as a training wheel. So in designing it that way, that led to a design with no instructor involvement. The content had to stand on its own. So when I ran the pilot for this training, the participants in the pilot didn't work together. So basically, they were on their own in their training experience. And I did it this way because I wanted this to be an acid test. And I wanted the material to be so clear that the people with no lean experience would experience success. Of course, there are online training design enemies. I was concerned about the enemies that I couldn't control. Everyone's time is at a premium, and I have to respect that. Motivation, it's easy to start a training, but it needs to be motivating enough to finish it. And then distraction, would the material that I created be compelling enough to hold the learner's attention? And then there's self-doubt. People who take a course like this may wonder if they're going to be successful, will they be able to apply what they learn in the real world? So I had to find ways to build encouragement into the training. Once the designing and beta testing was complete, I was ready to launch the pilot. So pilot number 1 launched on the end of July in 2020 and continued for about 12 weeks. And the training was successful. They were able to improve a process without any direct guidance or coaching from me. And they liked it, giving it an overall score of 9.2 out of 10. And I found actually, honestly, their positive reaction to me was exciting and motivating. It confirmed that we were on the right track. So the participants also gave me a lot of detailed feedback on how to improve the training. One of the biggest problems was the online training platform. It was almost impossible to navigate. They had a hard time keeping track of where they were in a lesson, and it was easy to get lost. So if you wanted to stop the training mid-lesson and come back to it later, you'd have to restart the lesson module all over again, and nobody liked that. So I gave the online training platform a 2.5 out of 10. And then the next biggest problem with the training at that point was this. I designed it for individual use by managers who had a team, but I didn't include sufficient support systems to help the manager transfer the learning to their teams. So we've all had this experience with training in general. We go and learn, but applying what we learn in real life can be a stretch. Somehow it just doesn't click, you need more. So you need more because there's a challenge with lean. And it's that, and it's actually been acknowledged that it's difficult to sustain. And I wanted this new training to help people conquer this challenge. So I started by designing process by getting clear about what kept people from sustaining lean. As we all know, lean's really effective when it works, and it always works, except when it doesn't. A while back, the Lean Enterprise Institute ran a survey, you may have seen this before, asking people about the biggest problems in implementing and sustaining lean. So these are the top 5. Middle management resistance, 36%. Lack of implementation know-how, 31%. Employee resistance, 28%. Supervisor resistance, 23%. Lack of crisis, 18%. So if you look at this, you start thinking, everybody says everyone else is resistant. It's like everyone's pointing fingers. Then there's a lack of implementation know-how. I have seen people accused of being resistant when the real problem was lack of know-how. And then there's the lack of crisis. If only there were a crisis, then we'd really change. But sometimes a crisis is not enough to change. So this is what I think. I think that change is hard. That's kind of pretty simple, but I think that's really the key here. So like take gym memberships, for example. People join the gym to improve their health. That's a change for the better. But within 6 months, 85% completely stop going. Making a change and keeping a commitment is just hard. You might be thinking that this is a low stakes commitment. Maybe we need a bigger crisis. So what if your life depended on you changing? 90% of coronary bypass surgery patients don't change their lifestyle even when they know their life depends on it. So crisis is not enough. But here's the interesting fact. Change still happens in spite of all this. So what I wanted to know was who changes and why. And I had some ideas and I noticed some patterns, but before I jumped to any conclusions, I did some investigation. I interviewed my clients and other high performers, and I asked them why they thought they succeeded. And I paid attention not only to what they told me, but also to their attitudes and their beliefs and their emotions. And I've got to say, I found these interviews inspiring. My successful clients shared certain characteristics. How much training they got or the level of support did not seem to be distinguishing factors. Now, don't get me wrong. Support, whether it's from the top, the middle, or below, is super important, but it's not sufficient. What my clients showed me is that the primary source of support for them comes from within. Their approach to life was the most important factor in their success. And this isn't surprising when you think about it. The pattern that I noticed had three main elements. First, these folks were curious about how things worked. They're willing to experiment and not just stick with the way things had always been done. Second, they were self-directed. They didn't wait for someone else to push them to make improvements. And the third thing, they were acknowledged as high performers in their organization. And I think you know the type, right? They're the ones you go to because you can trust them to get things done. So here's an example of the pattern. So one person I interviewed described herself as a natural problem solver. She loves to fix things that don't work. And once she fixes one thing, she's ready to go on to the next thing. So an example she shared with me was that with no external mandate, she was able to take a hospital new patient process down from 25 steps to 6 steps. And that was just of her own volition. So here's another example of the pattern. So David Linham and Tina Rice from Kitsap County told me this amazing story. A few years back, we conducted a 5-day process improvement workshop at the county. The work was successful, but that's not what impressed me. So what impressed me happened a few years later after their previous director retired. A new director came in and announced that for whatever reason, they were not going to do lean anymore, no longer do lean. That came as a shock. Yet some of the managers were still committed to lean. I mean, they saw how it helped them deliver on their mission. They saw how it engaged their employees and took care of their customers. So they kept practicing lean, even though they had been told otherwise. So that's what I call a self-directed high performer. So my challenge was how to make this new training an environment for those who wish to be a force for positive change. And that's what I focused on. And I got a lot of support for this from colleagues and clients, and that led to my next pilot. So the third part of the story is how I wove leadership development into the lean training. So I had to go back to the drawing board. What I learned in the first pilot meant that I would need to rebuild the training and run a new pilot. I went back to the drawing board and created new videos and content. And I had to come up with a way that in an online program, the participants would practice what they learned with their teams. So it wasn't enough to be familiar with the material. They had to use it. They had to show competence, not just with improving a process, but with leading a team. So I had to build a training that blended lean with leadership development. And that really raised the stakes, and it had to work well the first time out. So again, the feedback made clear what problems I needed to fix. Find a platform that allowed learners to navigate freely. They needed to be able to stop and start a lesson wherever they wanted. And I also needed to build a structure that would do more than teach managers how to improve processes. They needed the confidence and the ability as leaders to guide their teams on changing their work processes together. After deliberating over the best way to provide a support system, I came up with this, creating a supportive manager cohort. So the managers would meet in a series of training and coaching sessions, and then go back to their teams to implement what they learned. The training became blended in that it combined independent work as well as live virtual training and coaching from me and my colleague, Marilyn Venegas. I was grateful to find an organization that was willing to help me by piloting this new version of the training. So Ellen Stewart, Jonathan Swift, and Shelley Basketfield, directors at the Seattle Public Utilities, they graciously agreed to participate in the second pilot. Going beyond the online training we used in the first pilot, this second one included live virtual training sessions and coaching. 5 Seattle Public Utilities managers made up this training cohort, and we ran that training earlier this year, early 2021. They liked it. They gave it an overall score of 9.3 out of 10. And they were also very generous with their feedback and suggestions. In fact, I have to say their contributions significantly improved the quality and the effectiveness of the training. We, of course, were thrilled. We're glad that the changes made such a difference in the manager's training experience. So this is a table showing the processes the cohort worked on and their results. And they all achieved measurable results that had a positive impact on a lot of people, even beyond the cohort and their teams. And there are 5 items here, but I'm just going to read a couple of them so you get the idea. So one team saved 412 hours per year reviewing and interpreting system reports. And another team saved 110 hours per year on a contract assignment and intake process, and they reduced their lead time from 3 days to 22 minutes, which I think is pretty cool. So we received a lot of great comments from the participants, and here are 3 of them. The online training platform was easily acceptable, and it was easy to understand the progression of steps. Definitely a great chance to learn from others, successes and failures. And finally, encourages us to finish when other trainings did not. So let's talk about what you can do to get these kinds of results by combining your lean training with leadership development. So the participants in both pilots indicated a number of critical success factors, but there are 3 that I think had the most impact. So the first one is that it has to be clear, because confusion is the enemy of learning. Second, it has to be simple, because complexity leads to unnecessary struggle. And then it needs to be easy to follow. Participants always need to know what their next step is. And funnily enough, as obvious as these may seem, they're really hard to do. It takes a lot of thought and iterative testing. So when you're creating your own training, don't fall into the trap that your training is clear and simple just because you think it's clear and simple. It's up to your trainees to decide if it works. And if they say it doesn't work, that means it doesn't work, and you need to go back to the drawing board. So, excuse me. So here's a tip on how to create clear, simple training. Apply lean principles to your training programs. We make training way more effective when we use these lean principles. So let's start with overproduction, which means producing more than you need. is there enough training material, or is there more training material than is needed to get the job done? Sometimes people treat training like a shopping cart, and the more stuff they can put into that cart, the better. But the question is all that stuff really needed? Over-processing, which means adding more value than is needed. So what do people really need to know to get the job done? Do they really need to know the Japanese terms for waste? And then just in time versus just in case. If they really need to know how to do something, are they introduced to it immediately before they use it, or meaning just in time, or are they taught things just in case they might need it? And then wasted talent. Is the training making people work harder to learn, harder than it needs to be? Is the training unnecessarily complicated? And then one-piece flow. Do you teach one thing at a time at a rate that can be absorbed by the learners? The brain is limited on how much new information can be learned at a time. And does each lesson flow logically from one to the next? So now I want to move beyond critical success factors. Let's look at how the power of culture in groups and the power of individual managers can solve Lean's essential problem, just making it more sustainable. So Lean is a solution that impacts both culture and process. So as people involved with Lean, or people who want to be involved with Lean, you can go beyond getting rid of waste and increasing productivity. You have the opportunity to build a continuous improvement culture, and you have an opportunity to make engagement and inclusion real. And I'm saying this because Lean with leadership development together harnesses the power of culture and the power of groups and the power of the individual manager. So let's start with the power of culture. We all know that culture is important, but it's hard to define. People have written books about it, and they've earned PhDs studying it. So I'm curious about what you think. We all have a sense of what culture is. So my question to you is, what is culture? What do you think? And please put your answers in the chat. Happiness and satisfaction, mindset, history. Oh, they're coming so fast, I can barely read them. How things are done, the people, norms, way of life. Yeah, culture is what is allowed. That's right. Yeah, it's a reflection of values, right? It's what we're used to, how things are done around here, organizational norms. Yeah, good. What's comfortable? Yeah, that comfort zone. Values and mindset, I agree. Yeah, I think these are all hitting it. Okay, so I want to share with you what I think about culture, and I think it's pretty consistent with what you guys are thinking. My definition of culture is what people do and how people treat each other. I think it's that simple, and I think I saw this reflected in a lot of your comments. This graphic shows that what people do is heavily influenced by how they make decisions and how they solve problems. How people treat each other is heavily influenced by their values and social skills. So understanding culture in this way is a great opportunity because you can actually do something about what you do and how you treat each other. So when you use Lean with leadership development, you're training people to be more effective decision makers and problem solvers. And when you embrace the Lean value of respect for people, you're encouraging them to develop their leadership skills and to encourage others. So when you do this, you're actually planting the seeds of culture change. And this is why I think Lean with leadership development can be used for engagement and inclusion. So part of that reason is because Lean makes inclusion and engagement concrete. For example, those who are affected by change are included in making the change. That's the way we do things in Lean. Inclusion and engagement is built into that process. Another thing you can do is identify the behaviors of exclusion and disengagement as non-value-added wastes. I do this, and I encourage you to do the same if that makes sense to you. That's because exclusion and disengagement get in the way of a team functioning at their best. And it gets in the way of your people effectively delivering on your mission. It's just pure waste. So let's look at how the power of groups can impact culture. So we kept the size of the manager cohort small by limiting enrollment to 5 managers. Now, I know there's pressure to include as many people in training as possible. The idea is to maximize the training investment. Unfortunately, that's like watering down your medicine. It loses its effectiveness. Small cohort size creates a safe space to build camaraderie and momentum. And they need to be able to speak freely with each other by sharing their successes and their challenges. Learning from each other builds their confidence because they become each other's teachers. And creating this kind of atmosphere is very hard, if not impossible, with larger groups. So in the next few slides, I'm going to share with you the power of the individual manager and how that affects culture. I intentionally designed our training to be manager focused. Managers learn the material, and then they in turn guide their own teams on how to do Lean. And there are several reasons why we did it this way. So since managers were on the hook for sharing the material, they were very motivated to learn it. So they came back to the cohort with questions relevant to them as they implemented with their teams. The other thing I like about doing it this way is that it increases the manager's self-reliance and adaptability. It gives them an opportunity to prove to themselves that they have the ability to do this work. The trainer functions as a coach, not as a training wheel. Another thing that I like about this approach is that it creates an opportunity for managers to strengthen their working relationships with their teams. And this is where the employee engagement gets amplified. That's because the manager is showing interest in their own, their employees' work lives and giving them the power to change their own work. The employees get to participate, giving them that sense of control that they can make their own work better. Another reason that I like having managers show their own teams how to do Lean, it establishes the manager as the leader of the effort, not the consultant, not the trainer. Here's another way that individual managers can affect culture. Find a way to bake improving processes into the identity of the manager. Too often, Lean is implemented as an initiative, an add-on, something that people have to do in order to check a box. And it's sometimes it's hard to avoid doing it that way. So you have to find another way to bring it into your culture, not just as part of a manager's job description, but as a part of their identity. And that's one of the reasons we made this a leadership development program. We want to help managers understand that to be effective leaders, they need to know how to identify problems and marshal the efforts of their team to solve those problems effectively. It's also important to show managers that Lean and leadership development training is a perk. In the beginning of launching a Lean program, or when you're trying to revive a Lean program, select your self-directed high performers to be among the first to be trained. This sends a signal that your Lean leadership program has great value and that it's a privilege to participate. Plus, your self-directed high performers are set up so that they can set the example and set the pace for everyone else. It's important for managers to understand that learning how to improve processes and lead teams is part of building their career. Their ability to improve productivity and engagement becomes a part of their reputation and their value as a professional. So, and this value, their value, their own personal value added is portable. It travels with them to their next position and hopefully to their next promotion. So it'll be obvious to any high performer that learning about lean and how to be a better leader is an investment in their own career. You can help your leadership team understand that lean with leadership development is an investment in their up and coming talent pool. This is important, especially these days with good talent getting harder to find and retain. Plus, it's an investment in creating an organization that gets better and better at delivering your mission. So every process improvement project is its own hero's journey. And like every hero's journey, there's a struggle and a challenge. My challenge was to conquer the frustrations we've all had with online training. And I wanted to make an online training for lean with leadership development that was really effective. And thanks to my friends, clients, and colleagues, I was able to do that. So finally, what I want to say is that we all have challenges before us right now. Delivering on our mission with limited resources, adapting to rapidly shifting priorities, and responding to the call for engagement and inclusion. Today, I've shared with you the structure, the tips and tools that you can use to meet your challenges. And it's in meeting those challenges with your friends and colleagues that makes this journey really gratifying, deeply gratifying, and even life-changing. So thank you very much. What questions can I answer?
Thank you so much, Carlos, for that great session. Does anybody have any questions? I haven't seen any questions specifically to the presentation yet in the chat or in the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please drop those in the Q&A box so we can get those answered for you. But I do want to thank you, Carlos, for being here, and Marilyn as well for being here for support. And thank you to everybody in the audience that attended today. Oh, looks like there's a question. So what are some pushbacks or barriers you have seen from managers adopting lean?
Oh my gosh. How much time do we have? I think, so I guess let me kind of, I'll put a boundary around this. I'll just answer the question in the context of delivering training, whether it's online or in person. The managers typically are worried about two things. One is just resistance. How do I deal with resistance? Are my people going to do what I want them to do and really put their hearts into it? Because we all know if somebody doesn't want lean to work, it's just not going to work. It's easy to slow walk stuff. Just be passively aggressive or passively resistant. The other part is understanding what they need to do. They're concerned about knowing the right steps, having a structure to move forward. They need to feel like they're confident about the process that they're learning, and that it's going to be relatively easy to share it with their group. Right? There are enough problems with dealing with resistance and complexities without adding to the burden with the way we train with lean or even implement it.
Thank you. Let's see. Can you please review the tip, clear, simple, easy to follow side? You mentioned overproduction, overprocessing, just in time, wasted talent, and one piece flow.
Yeah, let me go to this. Okay. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So review it. Could you be a little more specific? Is there something you'd like me to expand on?
There wasn't specifics in that question. I apologize for that. But if you could just quickly kind of wrap it up in a couple sentences.
Put it in a nice little bow. Yes, I will do that. So here, yeah, I think I had my first training in Lean in around 1996, 97 timeframe. And I remember being stuck in a room with some really great people, very knowledgeable Lean people, but just getting hammered with all this information and just not being able to absorb it as quickly as it was being thrown at us. And it just struck me how we did not use the Lean principles that we learn in production in training. But they make a lot of sense. I think the key here is there's so much wisdom in Lean principles and in Lean tools that if we're going to apply, if we're going to ask people to learn Lean, we might as well use those in developing training or even workshops that help them be more successful.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What have you found to be the biggest gap in leadership development efforts?
Oh, well, that's also a general question, and I'll just try to put a boundary around it, just in the context of the training. I would say the challenge is know-how, kind of like in that survey that the Lean Enterprise Institute did. The managers that I work with are almost always pretty committed to their work. They're very mission oriented, and that's one of the cool things about working with government entities. In fact, I find it inspiring. So I think most feel the challenge is just not knowing how to make this happen. They see things that aren't working. They're frustrated by the quote unquote bureaucracy, but they don't know what to do about it. And so when you provide them with a methodology that shows them step by step how to deal with quote unquote bureaucracy, how to be more effective in increasing employee engagement, increasing employee satisfaction, increasing customer satisfaction. I mean, then they become more confident, and the entire organization benefits.
Right. And do you have any suggestions for overcoming resistance with a peer supervisor?
With a peer supervisor. Okay, so yes. The first thing actually two things come to my mind. So the first one is don't resist resistance. We can amplify other people's resistance by resisting it. Right? We can try to talk them out of their resistance or push them into something that they don't want to do. If somebody is truly resistant, that's their thing. What I encourage my clients to do is focus on the stuff that they have control over. Don't go try to fix other people's processes. Work on your own. Stick with that. If someone is for example, giving you something that you need and the quality isn't what it should be, then that's a different story. And that means maybe getting a sponsor. If you can't negotiate with that peer supervisor or peer manager, elevating it. But that's really kind of a situational thing. It just depends on what the situation is, how to best handle it.
There's another question about resistance. Climate can be different than culture and can vary from team to team. So how would you address climate and resistance that come from different climates in Lean?
Okay, so we're talking about like team climate, the climate in the team.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once again, that's also very broad. And I would say, I have done so many workshops and trainings where team climate was an issue. There was resistance. And, often what I've found is that climate didn't just come out of nowhere. I mean, there's a reason for that. And often it's because they don't feel heard, or they don't feel respected, or they're frustrated because they're trying to do a good job and they're having a hard time doing that. I mean, nobody comes to work saying, I want to do a crummy job. And what I have found is focusing on what you have control over. I mean, this is similar to the answer I just gave you, focusing on the things that you have control over and working with your team on improving something together, improving something that's important to them. It doesn't even have to be big. It doesn't have to be solving your version of world hunger. It can be something small, but impactful. And when teams get to do that together, that is the best morale booster. I mean, this is better than, I mean, I don't know how often this is done anymore, but, companies used to do offsites, they go-kart racing or a ropes course or, this company picnic or whatever. Working together, improving a process is the best morale booster. It's the best team builder. So I would say that the best way to do it is just move forward with doing a process improvement project that is right-sized for your group.
Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. How do you keep people engaged and excited during an online training?
So a couple things. So one is being engaged yourself. Hopefully you love what you're doing, or if you don't, maybe if you could find something you love about what you're doing. I think that's one thing. Just find your own enthusiasm with the information, but that is not enough, because if you just rely on that, it is ultimately exhausting. You can't carry the team. What I have found works for me is finding out what's important to the manager and to the team themselves. And, like, what are your biggest issues? And saying, okay, if we're going to do whether we're doing a training or a workshop, let's focus on some element of that big issue that you guys want to deal with. So it becomes their own training or their own workshop, not mine.
That's awesome. All right. So in your experience, have you noticed any difference between government sector and private sector with adopting lean?
No. No, I haven't. I mean, I think obviously there are cultural differences, but I really wonder if they are cultural differences. Look, government has to deal with things that businesses don't have a clue about. On the other hand, businesses are dealing with things that government doesn't have to deal with. So, it's kind of hard to really compare them. I would say that in business, cost is really important. Okay, whatever we're talking about, we may not focus on improving cost during a workshop, but ultimately at the end of the day, managers want to see cost reduction, efficiency, all this other stuff. In government, I focus on capacity, because you have your budgets, they are what they are, and your job is to spend that budget wisely, delivering on your mission. And to the extent that you can increase that capacity, you can be more effective in delivering on your mission, which is super important now, especially with reduction in certain budgets. I mean, I know some organizations are doing fine, but others aren't. The other thing is, when I first started working with government, I had some colleagues going, why do you want to work with government? And, I think that's kind of a judgment going on, and I've found that judgment to be wrong, just plain wrong. There are so many mission-focused, committed people in government, and you don't see, I should say you don't, I haven't seen that level of commitment in the private sector unless it's the business owner.
All right, so we've got about 7 more minutes, so just time for a couple more questions.
Okay.
How do you reinvigorate a lean initiative when you notice a loss of momentum?
Well, I mean, if a client came to me, I'd say, well, let's talk about it. Let's do an analysis. But if I had 1 minute, which I do, to tell you what I thought, it would be this. Go back to your self-directed high performers and get them to be the nucleus of your restart, if you will. They're the ones who are going to prove the concept, and they're going to work at proving the concept. And they're also going to give you really good feedback. I mean, I didn't really emphasize this. I did a little bit, but feedback is one of the most important tools that you have. You have to be willing to hear things from your trainees or your workshop participants that you don't want to hear. You've got to be open to that. And your self-directed high performers are going to give you high quality feedback. And if you follow them, if you follow their feedback, you're going to get their enhanced level of commitment. And then the next wave of people who are trained are going to have all these models of people who've done so well, who have proven the concept. That's what I would suggest.
Great, thank you. And last question, can you talk a little bit about breaking down silos to increase capacity?
Yes. That is such a hard thing for some organizations because it's entrenched. What I found, this is kind of a little bit off the online training, but I think you can adapt this. I think that one of the cool things about Kaizen events, your 3 to 5 day events, is where you get cross-functional teams who are standing in a conference room and they start putting their process steps on Post-notes up on the wall. And we all step back and we go, oh my gosh, this is how we relate to each other and we don't like it. We want to make it better. You can still do that online. And if you use I'm trying to think of that. There's a Microsoft tool that you can use to map out processes. If you could do a cross-functional online process mapping and then identify areas where there are problems, this kind of call it, I know that some purists are going to not like this, but if you call it value stream mapping light then you can see the results of being heavily siloed and help people understand their interdependency. The more complicated aspect of this is the way people are organized, the org chart and how they're compensated. That's a little, outside of my area of expertise. But from a process standpoint, I would work on getting a cross-functional team working together.
Those are great ideas. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that attended this session. Please just know that there's more conference to come. Today's only day 2, so go ahead and visit our website. You can watch sessions that you may have missed or sign up for additional sessions. And please also take the survey that will pop up in just a moment so that we can get some real-time feedback because we are always looking for ways to improve. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.